So today, I'm going to talk about something that probably interests a lot to many IT admins, Active Directory admins. Who here manages some Active Directory? Okay, many of you. What about the other people? So are you guys? Do you guys have to do with identity? Identity, security. Yeah. Okay. So many of you will benefit from this session. So my name is Jairo Cadena. Here's my blog. You can go and see all the posts that I have made. I work on the Azure AD team at Microsoft, and I'm a program manager that basically owns scenarios related to devices in Azure AD. So basically, everything that you need to all the benefits that you get when you bring your devices to Azure AD. Think of what we did with domain join in the past with Active Directory on-prem. So workplace join, Azure AD join, domain join, and all that has to do with that. In this session in particular, this is not my session. I didn't author this session, but this is a breadth type session. We are going to cover all the aspects of Azure AD and the identity and security solution that we have that is called Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite. Who has heard about EMS here? Okay, yeah, many of you have already. That's my Twitter handle, so please feel free to send a question, any comment, anything, any feedback that you guys have from the product as well. We'll be happy to hear it from you guys. So let me start with these statistics. So this data shows, gives some context on why what we are going to talk about is important for you guys. So this first number, 63%, shows that from all the different threats and vulnerabilities and data breaches that happen in your organizations, 63% of them happen because there was some kind of bad password, stolen password, some vulnerability on that front. 80% of users in your organization deploy some kind of shadow IT. So you guys may have some specified applications for your users to use, but many of your users, 80% of them, will try and reach other applications to be productive. And then the third one is actually pretty sad, which is that 0.6% is expected in investment growth in 2016. That was last year. So some of this data probably has been changed a little bit, but that gives some good idea of the environment where we as IT admins and identity and security admins deal every day. So enterprise mobility and security is basically the vision of Microsoft to bring users' identities, device identities, applications, and data protection into one solution, one integrated solution. The idea that, when we talk about identity and security, there are two aspects for that. One is you want to make sure that your users are productive, so there's that business part of it in which users need to do their day-to-day work. And of course, this has changed because, the world is not the same as it was 10 years ago, for example. But then at the same time, you need to be sure that there are no breaches, no threats, and then security has to be on top of everything that you do. So what happened? Basically, the world changed. And now we are in a world where there are not just few applications, but there's a proliferation of applications, mostly of them in the cloud. There are many, many, many devices that users bring, they may access Exchange or email or SharePoint documents from their phones, from their tablets. And now you don't have the same control that you had, in the last 2 decades. And the vision of Microsoft with Azure AD is that you will be able to have a control plane on all the access that happens from users, from different devices, from different regions, on a more mobile workforce than ever, on applications that are on premises or applications that are in the cloud, and then you have one single point, one single hub that you will be able to control. So this is the world as it was, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. You had your on-premises Active Directory, and you had some specific applications, web applications, Win32 applications, SQL servers on premises. You had your Exchange on premises. All your data was confined into a specific corporate network that was protected by firewalls and by, basically location-based security, network security. And as users started to bring their own devices, and we started looking into this phenomena of consumerization of IT and bring your own devices and all these fancy terms, you started allowing access by poking holes into your firewalls and doing things like VPN or direct access. And the world was okay until you realized that there were so many more applications that users started to access to just access your data. And suddenly, now you find out that your corporate data is not anymore confined to your corporate network, but now it's going to be in different applications out there, and you have no clue where or how or which users are accessing what data, and that became a problem. So what Microsoft was trying to do is bring a solution to that problem, and not only users, but also these devices and all that. So Microsoft Azure Active Directory was put in the middle as a hub that will bring the access and the control for access to these applications from these users, from these devices, from these different locations to a single control plane, as we call it. So now you'll see that the same identities that you had in on-premises Active Directory, those IDs can come to the cloud, and then even if the user is accessing on-premises applications from anywhere in the world, you will be able to have a clear visibility, transparency. You will be able to have reports, very clear reports, so all access basically meets the compliance that you need. Now, the question is, why Azure AD? Why not a third-party directory? And basically, Azure AD is not one kind of a startup type of directory. It's a directory very well established that has been right there for many of our customers. 80% of Fortune 500 customers have deployed Azure AD. Azure AD is the directory for Office 365. Who here has Office 365 or deal with that? Yeah, almost all of you, right? So Office 365, Azure, CRM, all these directory, all these solutions depend on Azure AD for authentication and identity management. We have more than 10 million tenants, directories in Azure AD, with more than 750 million user accounts in the directory. We have 110 plus thousand plus third-party applications that use Azure AD every month, and that statistic, which is a very important one, not just because it's kind of it's impressive, but it's because from there is where we can get all the data, all the intelligence that we can bring back in terms of services. So we have 1.3 billion daily authentications in Azure AD. And when that volume happens, and we have visibility of that type of, big data, if you will, in terms of authentications and access, then we can transform that data and put it back to you and generate value to you guys in terms of reporting, auditing, risk management, and you'll see some of those in the session. And then we have here some 33,000, probably we're a lot more now, this was last year, but those are customers who who didn't get Azure AD because of Office 365 or some other solution. They got it specifically for EMS. So they trusted Azure AD, and the set of products that Azure AD and EMS have, Intune and others, for identity management and security. So when we think about identity and access management, there are 4 pillars that Azure AD offers, and 4 pillars that we try to highlight in terms of all the features and solutions that we provide. So the first one is that there's one identity that you provide to one of your employees, your users, and with that identity, that individual will be able to access thousands of applications, will be able to enjoy single sign-on. They will be able to enjoy things like enterprise roaming of settings in Windows 10, so they can go and sign into different Windows 10 devices, and they see that there are common themes across those devices. They will be able to access on-premises applications that are published through the Azure AD application proxy. They will be able to be productive with Office 365. They will be able to collaborate between organizations in a B2B type of configuration, and that's with just that one identity. And that one identity is the real, truly one identity, which is the same ID that user has in on-prem AD. So Azure AD is an extension of on-prem AD for those of you who have on-premises AD, and that identity is the one that enables the rest of benefits. The second pillar is enable business without borders, and this is where we talk about more collaboration between partners, between organizations, without the need of complex configurations, federation. Back in, let's say, 5-10 years, you may be, probably you thought about, maybe deploying some ADFS on premises or some STS on-prem, creating some federation with your partner to be able to share some document in SharePoint, for example. So now, when we are talking about Azure AD, you will be able to do it very quickly by just maybe assigning a membership of a group to specific users that may or may not be in your organization. And that way, you will be able to have collaboration across in a very easy way. You can also enable scenarios like if that user brings their own identity, like Live account, Google account, you will be able also to collaborate across those domains. Now, the third one, managed access at scale, is when we're thinking about, in the world where there are so many combinations, so many users, devices, locations, applications, it is really hard to understand what's happening behind the scenes. But Azure AD will be providing some tools that will help you with that. You will be able to control risk. You will be able to say things like, I want to allow access to my email only if the risk of authentication is medium or lower. I want to block high risk, for example. And then I'll talk later what does that mean, how we calculate that risk, how we can offer those tools for you to manage that access. And then, of course, on cloud protected power protection, we are talking about conditional access. Who knows the conditional access capabilities that Azure AD has, Azure AD Premium? No, just just probably 1, 2, 3 here. So this is the capability that you have on specifying specific conditions that need to be met before an access is granted. So again, you could say SharePoint Online required that access is made only from devices that are known to the organization. They could be domain joined, they could be marked as compliant by Microsoft Intune, for example, or you could say, I will force multi-factor authentication before I can even allow access to email, or things like this. Or I can say, this high business impact application cannot be accessed unless the user is coming from a known network, my corporate network. But if that user goes out, then that user will be denied. So let's go one by one, and I'll try to go fast on this and maybe have some more time on a demo so we can see clearly what does it mean in the end. But so again, on the one identity and thousands of applications, we are talking about single sign-on, secure remote access to on-premises applications, extending the on-premises Active Directory to the cloud. Again, it's one identity, the same one. Let's say one example is, in my corporate domain join laptop, I sign in to Windows using, the domain name, Redmond, /my alias, HiroC, right? And then, it's pretty common, the NetBIOS format. I type my username and type my password. But then when I get into the device, which is, functionality that has existed for 20 years today, I don't only notice that I have access and single sign-on to file servers and printers, but I also have a single sign-on to Office 365 or Salesforce.com or any application that is published through the Azure AD application proxy. And not only if I am on-prem, before, like if you deployed an ADFS server, if you were on-prem with a line of sight to a domain controller, you could kind of have some single sign-on that aspect. But if you went to Starbucks or to your favorite cafe, that was it. Now, with this pillar, what we are trying to do is that using that identity, again, was Redmond /HiroC, which is a common on-prem AD identity. I could have access to all the power to the cloud, single sign-on with just that sign-in. So how do we achieve this? So basically, you may have your on-prem Active Directory. You may have other directories, LDAP directories, some other kind of directories. And by deploying a single connector, the one that we call Azure AD Connect, what we do is basically bring those identities to Azure AD. And you may decide to bring the passwords along with that, or you may decide to keep your passwords on-prem. If depending on the spectrum of toleration of how secure you need to be, you may decide to keep your passwords on-prem, your keys on-prem, and things like that. Deploy some federation server, but the identity that is coming to Azure AD is practically the same one. And then along with that, after that identity is in the cloud, any application that trusts Azure AD for authentication will be able to make use of that. In technical terms, that means that that application will be able to take a token from Azure AD. Azure AD will take the credentials of a given user, will issue that token for all those applications that trust in Azure AD. And again, by deploying that simple connection, you may have all your on-prem identities go up to the cloud. Now, in terms of applications that can trust Azure AD, of course, we have Office 365. That's pretty clear. And then we have some like 2,700 plus applications that we have pre-integrated with Azure AD, including, Salesforce.com, Box, Google Apps, you name it. So there are so many. But those applications, let's say that you are already using some of them, Workday, HR type of applications, line of business applications, you will be able to integrate them super quick. You could create your own LOB applications. If you have applications that you develop on site, you can make them trust Azure AD as well. You can deploy or publish on-premises web applications through the Azure AD application proxy, and basically by publishing them to through the proxy, you will be able to make them available from anywhere. Now, all those applications, SaaS applications, Office 365 on-prem applications published through the proxy, those applications, all those are considered Azure AD trusted applications. So again, when you sign into one of those applications, you will be able to sign into any of the others. One identity that will open the door for all those applications. Now, let's talk about the on-premises applications for a moment. So you know that, web applications, and especially that have been developed in the last 10, 15 years, they may have, different models of development. Even in the last 20 years, that has been evolved from different models to, to more advanced or more, advanced models. But the truth is that you may find web applications, some that trust in headers, some that may use different mechanisms, cookies, others that don't use cookies, things like this. The applications that you can publish through the Azure AD application proxy is a vast majority of them, but there are some, let's say, applications that are developed in Linux, Apache, some specific protocols that we can say that legacy protocols. We have partnered with Ping Identity, Ping Access, to transform those protocols into modern protocols, OpenID and OAuth protocols that basically will talk the language of, standards, modern standards, which of course Azure AD understands. So with this, we are not just allowing, the well-developed, or not well-developed, but the specifically developed applications that you can that you can publish through the Azure AD application proxy, but even those legacy applications via Ping Access, you can do that as well. So we have been covering a bunch of applications, but now let me tell you something else. So in Windows, being Windows the best platform for doing work, that's something that also Microsoft wants to do as a vision. There are many advantages in terms of what we can do in the architecture of Windows per se to support authentication to Azure AD and support this, single sign-on natively. But of course, we offer those benefits also to iOS, Android, and Mac OS X and other platforms. So to allow that and to bring that value to these platforms, we have the Microsoft Authenticator app. And very recently has been revamped to have just one single application. Before there were different applications, one for device registration, one for single sign-on, et cetera, et cetera. But now there's one single application that you can deploy in your iOS devices, in your Android devices, and basically get the same benefits of one identity, single sign-on, device registration, making those devices known to Azure AD, and therefore being able to control access based on the identity of those devices, et cetera, et cetera. And then one last thing, or let's say one last set of applications that we haven't covered. Again, Office 365, SaaS applications that are modernly created that can trust Azure AD, on-premises applications that can be published through the web application proxy, Azure AD application proxy, web applications with legacy protocols that can be published through the Azure AD application proxy and Ping Access. But then now you may have some applications that truly have legacy non-HTTP protocols, maybe Win32 applications, maybe they connect via LDAP, some other protocols that cannot be published through a web interface. So for that, we also offer a solution, and that's Active Directory Azure AD Domain Services. And that is basically the solution for you to lift and shift applications that are on premises that trust on those protocols, Kerberos, NTLM, LDAP, maybe Reliant Group Policy, but they are not really web applications that you can publish. You can create let's say, a facade in the cloud. It's like deploying a domain controller in the cloud that is connected to Azure AD, then bring that application up as a VM in Azure, and that application will keep working as it was basically just authenticating against on-premises AD. So with that in mind, basically we are giving solutions to cover all spectrum of applications. Hopefully we do not have one application that is left out, that we can say, hey, I have this application, I cannot adopt Azure AD because I cannot get rid of that application. Okay, so we talked about that first pillar, which was one identity, thousands of applications, single sign-on, the convenience of authentication. Let me move on to enable business without borders before I jump into the demo, which is probably more fun at this point. But on enable business without borders, we're talking about connecting basically organizations with their partner organizations, being able to collaborate between partners, being able to enable consumer identities to access organizational resources. We're talking about anytime, anywhere productivity, ease of use for end users, so things like the ability for your users to reset their passwords. Some time back, help desk call and cost because users trying to reset the passwords was extremely high. And one of the key features that we added, and one of the first even features that we added, was self-service password reset, and this is part of this solution. Here we are talking, in this pillar, we are also talking about devices being able to access Azure AD and being able to be productive from anywhere. So when we talk about making the lives of users and IT easier, we can mention a few things that I'm going to show you in the demo. One is the My Apps application, which is basically a portal where a user can just go and see all the applications that user has assigned to. And based on group membership, based on their role in the organization, they can go and see their devices. They can go and reset their password or change their password if needed. And that's basically My Apps, that Microsoft.com in browser. In iOS and Android, there are specific mobile applications that basically serve the role of that portal. And again, I'll show you live so it's easier to understand. Now, enable business without borders. We're talking about, again, collaboration. Our friends in Kodak Alaris basically have deployed this, and this is something that they're very happy with. It's basically without having external directories, no need of partner federation, just by simple membership operations, group membership operations, like adding my friends, my partners' account into my group, Azure AD will take care of the rest and will be able to enable that access. Now, again, we briefly talked about this. So with Windows 10, you can register those devices with Azure AD. So there's probably tens of millions of devices today that are joined to an on-premises Active Directory. We have provided a very simple way for these devices to register against Azure AD themselves, and then basically enabling instant value. And I'm going to have a session tomorrow at the same time, 3:15 tomorrow, and I'll talk all about Windows 10 and how you can get all this value, how you can enable productivity by enabling enterprise roaming of settings, for example. You go to your favorites or you go to your Office recently accessed documents from one device to another. You will be able to see all those details across devices. When you bring your devices to Azure AD, you also bring all the benefits of conditional access. So by these devices being registered with Azure AD, there's now a credential and an identity for that device that we will be able to consume and make decisions based on that. So you could say that mobile devices that are managed via Microsoft Intune, which is part of the product family of EMS, must have marked that device as compliant You define what compliant means in Intune. You say that it requires encryption, that requires some PIN of certain complexity, that the device is not jailbroken. Intune will compute that locally on the device. We'll send that up to Microsoft Intune. We'll say that device is compliant or not, and it will write that back into Azure AD. So now when you are accessing, let's say, Office 365 from that device, along with the user identity, we request the device identity, and then we identify that device object in the cloud, and we can see whether that device is compliant or not. And if not, then we offer some self-remediation instruction, like maybe your device is not enrolled, or maybe you need to go to the Intune portal and know why that device is not compliant. Maybe you need to enable encryption or set a PIN, and now you will be able to have access. And then we talked very briefly about B2C, which is the ability to enable access to users that bring their own identities, consumer identities, Live, Xbox, Gmail, whatever, Yahoo accounts. All right, so now let's talk about this third pillar before we move into the demo. Again, I want to show you guys a demo that can cover most of these concepts that I have been talking about. But with this, we are talking about how we can take a peek into what's happening behind the scenes with all the authentications that are happening daily to my enterprise applications from different devices, and then identify risk, identify what threats I have, and then how can I act on those. So here we have multiple aspects to this. User lifecycle management. Basically, we offer a management console that I will show you in the demo. You can have a centralized access, administration of the applications that you want to offer to your users. You have an application gallery. Again, 2,700 plus applications are available for you to add. And then you can do things like provisioning applications to users based on the membership of that user. And say, for example, like in the case of the demo that I'm going to show you, there's a specific individual who was moving from marketing to sales. And then by him joining a group of the sales team, then automatically that user would have access to those applications of that team. And again, this doesn't need to be an admin, like an IT admin that is assigning those applications. This could be just a department head, an administrator of the department that can do all these things, can maybe approve a membership request, a group membership request, or you can say that I want to have an auto approval logic in this group. So all this flexibility is part of this. And also we have what we call dynamic groups that basically define the membership of a given user based on a specific condition of that user, a specific attribute value, or a specific location, region. So if the user changes regions, then maybe that user automatically is not part of the previous group anymore. Therefore, all the applications that were assigned to that user because he or she was belonging to that group, they are not assigned anymore. So you can have all this flexibility to set applications and assign applications to users. Now, so we talked about having on-prem AD, your on-premises directories, having one connector to the cloud, which was Azure AD Connect. And then, as part of that, you may or may not have an ADFS if you wanted to have your passwords on premises. If you were okay, you would sync up those passwords, rather the hashes of those passwords to the cloud, and Azure AD would do the authentication specifically. If you had something like an ADFS or federated, it is ADFS or the STS on-prem who would truly authenticate those credentials, and send that token up to Azure AD. But in that process of moving the users to the cloud, having an ADFS, maybe you had Azure AD domain services because you had some applications that you lifted to the cloud. There could be some things that you want to monitor. And for that, we offer Azure AD Connect Health that basically monitors the sync engine. You know, sync engine is very simple for you to deploy, but it is very important in many cases, even in things like devices. Like you have the way it works today, and I'll give some more details in my tomorrow's presentation. If you have an on-premises domain join device, a brand new device, Azure AD Connect has a very important role bringing those computers recently created, creating as device objects in the cloud, and then allowing the device to complete registration. So all those things you can control and you can monitor by using Azure AD Connect Health. So let me go to a demo right now, and let's try to see let's try to identify all the different things that we talked about. And in this particular case, I am signing as Garth. This is one of Contoso Build users. And again, this particular individual was in marketing, moved to sales. You know, he needed some change in his career. And when he went to the My Apps portal, myapps.microsoft.com, he will see these applications. And he kind of, he's kind of surprised because he only sees some applications. While he was in marketing, he got access to many other applications. So let's say, so now one of the applications is Exchange Online. So if he goes to that application, he will be able to see his email. And by looking at his email, he notices that there's a new email from Douglas 5, his manager, and he's sending him a welcome email telling, welcome to the team. Please become a member of the Sales Team Apps group, and then also please request access to the group Enterprise Social Apps. So he said, oh, okay, there you go. Let's do that. So here, if he goes to the tab Groups, he will be able to see all the groups that he has created. Again, this doesn't need to be an admin. It could be any user can create a group if they have the permissions. And he will see the memberships. So it is clear that he is not in the Sales Team Apps group. So he goes to all the groups, and he can type here sales. So Sales Team Apps, there you go. So he chooses this group, and one of the actions that he says is join group. So request to join Sales Team Apps, new to the group as the business justification for auditing purposes. So in this particular example, for this particular group, the logic behind the approval of the group is that this is a self-approval group. So it says your request has been auto-approved, you are now a member of the group. So now he says, oh, okay, now I need to request access to the Enterprise Social Apps group to get access to the Twitter accounts of the company. So he, in his new role, he needs to be able to do some communication, maybe respond to some queries from customers on their Twitter account. So he needs to have that access. And it says that additional authentication steps will require access to the company Twitter account. Okay, let's do that. He goes to groups again, goes to all groups, and then if he finds Enterprise Social Apps group, there you go here, he clicks on that, and he clicks on Join Group. Now again, this group has different, business conditions. It says that a request to join has been sent to the owner of the group. So in this particular case, I am here, logged in. So I'm using Microsoft Edge as Garth's session. I'm using Internet Explorer as the admin session. And again, this doesn't need to be an admin. This could be any user. But if I refresh my apps portal, which by the way in this particular case is showing a new interface that we revamped the interface, just wanted to show you both. But one of the things that he sees here is that he's a new notification. And it says Garth F at contosobuild.com requested to join Enterprise Social Apps, new to the team, approve, deny. He approves. And then when Garth goes here, and it may take some time, maybe maybe a minute or so, he should be able to see the additional applications. In this particular case, he has 10 applications. At any time now, we'll see. But he will be able to, what's happening behind the scenes right now is that as part of now this user is part of the sales team and the enterprise social media apps teams. And what's happening is that it is being provisioned these new applications for that user. So there you go. So now we have 27 applications right now. And of course, we have some of the new applications here. We have the enterprise Twitter account, for example. Like if he goes and clicks on that, you need Internet Explorer. Okay, I could go. There you go. But so now he will be able to see all the new applications. So again, what we saw was that by just having new memberships, new group memberships, then that user was provisioned these applications in a very, very easy and automatic way. Let's see. So let me go back to the session. All right. Okay, so we saw that. Again, we saw how that user was provisioned multiple applications. When we clicked on Exchange Online, that user was taken to their email without entering credentials again. So that's single sign-on. And then we saw how the management of groups happened via the My Apps application, that how you could manage the workflow for approval on those membership requests and the like. Now let's go to a very interesting point, pillar that's related to security. So far, when we talk about enabling productivity to users and basically make them more productive, make them more happy, we're always thinking on the other aspect, which is how to make that, but in a secure way. If we enable single sign-on, there are security implications to that, because now let's say that you sign in to your Windows device, and then you step out, or maybe your laptop was stolen. Now, if you have single sign-on without looking into risk or other conditions, now whoever took that laptop now will have access to all the applications without entering a password. So that's where we need to have that balance between productivity and security, and in many cases we actually achieve both in many different ways. So cloud power protection is basically the ability for you to have a clear visibility on what's happening behind the scenes. So let's talk about conditional access. So conditional access is the ability for you to control access based on a set of conditions that happen upon authentication, conditions could be the user identity, the group membership of that user, the device from where that user is doing the access, the location of that user or location of that device, conditions of risk, all that is basically conditions that either you can control or that we basically input into the equation. And then when we have all those input variables, we take the policy that is set on a specific application. Let's say that you are trying to access email via Exchange Online. We see what's the policy that you set, require domain join device, require MFA, require a trusted network, all of these things. And then by computing that, we either allow access, we deny access, or we request for more information. So you could say, this access requires multi-factor authentication because this user may not be accessing from a common location. It's like when you go on a trip and then maybe you are doing some expense with your credit card and then you receive a text saying, hey, is this valid or not? So it's in a very similar way we are trying to get this concept into Azure AD for authentication. So on that, we are basically, so there are conditions that are deterministic. Again, you would say, without a device that is known, you don't have access. Or this application requires that you only access it from the corporate network, or this application requires MFA. But there are some other conditions that are dynamic and that we are basically learning from the environment, from your authentications, and then we calculate a risk based on those conditions. So for example, when I was doing my demo with this GuardF Contoso build account, one of the things that I noticed is that I was asked for MFA. And what happened was, and I will show you in a minute, is that it said that for medium risk, you need to request MFA. For low risk, you can allow access. And for high risk, you need to deny access. And then things like location is one of them. Maybe if you have typed your passwords multiple times, things like this are all conditions that can be fed into this dynamic set of conditions that we can calculate. So now, one additional benefit from that is that by us having all that data, we can basically offer to you. You can basically do big data analysis, intelligence, based on that data. You can use Power BI. You can extract, download all those auditing, logs, and then do intelligence based on that. You could see how many users have been flagged for low risk, high risk, medium risk, and then maybe make some conditions and take some actions based on that. And then we have what we call privileged identity management, which is basically having visibility on all the privileged accounts, admins, global admins, or other types of administrators, and then we can provide some intelligence based on the usage of those accounts. So for example, we can say that some admins haven't used their role as appropriate, or maybe there are too many global administrators, and maybe we can just flag that, and you can take action, maybe just making an assessment on why you guys have so many global admins and remove some of them, for example. So this is pretty useful for those kind of intelligence, preventive actions that you can take before a real threat can cause some issue in your system. And then we have what we call limited activation of privileged role accounts. So an admin doesn't need to do admin or privileged operations all the time. So what you can do is, when you need to do some specific privileged operation, as an admin, you can request a temporary, let's say, a privilege that would allow you to do that for a limited time. and then the request of that will be gated in MFA, for example, and it will be logged and audited, and then again you will be able to look back afterwards and see how many of these privileges have been requested or have been used or misused, and then take action based on that. So let me jump on the second demo on identity protection. So in this particular case, I'll go to the admin's view, and here I am at the new Azure portal, which, by the way, many of the capabilities that were in the old Azure Management Portal, we have ported, or we are in the process of porting to this new portal. This is in public preview right now. It will be GA very soon. But then here's where you will be able to find all the benefits of this. So when you go to Azure AD, so you will be able to see all the users and groups, applications, et cetera, and then here you will be able to see this that's called conditional access. So conditional access, it will show basically all the policies that you have created. So for example, let's take a look at this. So policy name, protect Office 365 when not in corporate network. So let's take a look at that. And what you will be able to see is what the concepts that I briefly talked about conditions. What are the conditions that you want to check? Conditions of the application, conditions of the user, for example. So you can say, let's see, so in this particular policy, we are saying that all users will be evaluated for this policy, and this policy applies to all of users. You can say that only selected users and groups can be done, or you can say that you exclude some of these users. So the exclusion list is something that I've seen that when you are rolling this out, maybe you're doing a pilot and maybe you are extending the scope of that pilot. There are some, let's say, for example, you are doing some conditions based on the device, and maybe there's some VP that was blocked or somebody that was blocked because of that condition. He was probably not ready with the device being registered or being rolled into Intune at that moment. He needed to do something else. You could do these exclusions saying that people in this group will not be held accountable on this particular policy. Now, on the second one is cloud applications. So in here, it says, in this particular case, the policy is protect Office 365. So the application selected here is Office 365 Exchange Online. You could certainly add more applications to that. You can also exclude applications. And then the third one is what conditions I require for this access to be granted. So there are multiple things. Let me start by device platforms, and I'll go back to sign-in risk in a minute. So device platforms, you would be able to say that this policy will apply or will require that access is being made from a specific platform or not. So you can say all platforms are required to be evaluated for this policy, or you can say that only Windows or only iOS and Android if you want to set some mobile device policy. The second condition is about location. So you can say that, again, this policy will apply to any location. If it is on premises, if it's in the internet, then that policy will apply. You could exclude some of the locations. And then, or you could say that this would apply to all trusted IPs. And you can define what a trusted IP is by going here, configure all trusted locations. And this is basically as a way that you can set subnets and define what your corporate network is, for example. And then you can do things like only access from corporate is allowed. And then, so we talk about device platforms, locations, and then let's go back to sign-in risk for a second. So here is where you would say that either you will take into account risk calculation or not. And then if you say yes, you can say that only if high risk, only if the authentication request has been flagged as a high risk, then make this policy apply. Or medium risk, or low risk, or no risk at all. And then for client applications, so this is what, this is the story that we have for mobile platforms, that mobile devices that are not managed by Microsoft Intune, for example, like if you have a third-party MDM managing these devices, the alternative is for you to say that I will only allow access to, let's say, email exchange online only from the Outlook application or only from a specific client application. In other words, you are not opening access from any browser or from any application in the mobile device, but only those well-known applications, which is what we call mobile application management. And there are some controls and some assurances that you have along with this. So for example, you can say that you would not allow copy-paste. So if you are allowing access to Exchange from the Word or from the Outlook application in iOS, Outlook application from iOS is enlightened to what we call management application, mobile application management framework. And then when you're going to do copy and maybe paste it into a separate application, you won't be able to do that. You won't be able to have this kind of things in the device. There are some controls on that. So anyway, so you set all your conditions here. You may say that your high business applications may require additional conditions versus others, for example. And then when those conditions happen, those conditions that you have defined here for those cloud applications, for those users, you will be able to say what is the action that you want to do. You would say if that condition happens, you block access or you allow access. But if you allow access, you could say I require multi-factor authentication, or I require a compliant device, for example, or I require a domain joined device. So this is kind of an additional controls that you could say to be able to allow access to this. And then you have this ability, like if you have multiple controls, you could say require that all selected controls be enforced at the moment of authentication, or one of the selected controls. So this means that a very typical request is that if you are not coming from a known device, like a domain joined device or a compliant device, then I better challenge you for MFA, because there's something that I don't know about the device, but maybe I will be able to do that if you tell me, if you make assurance that you are who you say you are. So that's conditional access. Let me go to identity protection very quick so you guys can see some of the things that you will be able to do for intelligence. So in this particular case, you'll see users that are flagged for risk, for example, risk events by date, and you would say by day how many of these have been high versus medium versus low. Vulnerabilities that we have identified in your system. So for example, there have been 398 occurrences that users without multi-factor authentication registration. So that may mean that you are requiring MFA for some applications, but there are still some users that have not even do the sign up on MFA, for example. Roles don't require multi-factor authentication for activation, and managed apps discovered in the last 7 days. There are too many global administrators, for example, count 35, and things like this. And then, look at this, and managed applications discovered in the last 7 days. So those are applications that you are not controlling, that you are not managing, but from which access have been made. Now, let's say, for example, if you go to users flagged for risk, you will be able to see, so let's take an example of Garth, for example. And so let's take an example of what happened yesterday for me. Was that I started seeing some of these events, like signing from an unfamiliar location. I was at the hotel doing the demo, so at that point it was flagged like Garth has not been, it's not in a typical, it's not coming from a typical IP address range. So flags it, it gets to a point in which I was denied access. So what I did was dismiss all events in this particular case. Like say, for example, somebody called you and say, I have been logged out. I cannot access my application. I need to do that. Please give me access. So you would dismiss those events, and then you would remediate that status. There are self-remediation aspects, like maybe you are requesting MFA. If the user provided MFA, then that way is remediated as well. Let's see. Now, you have, again, risk events, vulnerabilities, like you can see signings from anonymous IP address, and you can see how many of these have happened, last updated, detection real time, and some others. Like these ones, signings from infected devices. For example, you will be able to have that detail. On vulnerabilities as well, those are the ones that, again, there are too many global admins, et cetera, et cetera. These are not things that generate problems at this point, but are risks that you need to address if you want to reduce the risk of a threat later on. Now, let's see, and I was looking at, so let's say, for example, user risk policy or signing risk policy. Again, you will be able to create a policy name. All users require multi-factor authentication. Let me see. And one of the important things that you need to have in mind is that when you create a policy about risk, you may want to know how many of these users, how many of the total users that you have will be impacted by this. So in the case of the example that I have just given, which was I don't have access anymore, I need to have help desk on the phone so they can help me. That's downtime, that's expensive again, so you need to be very careful on how you create those policies. But again, if you create that policy, you will be able to see how many of the total users, in this particular case for MFA, out of the 252 users, 9 will be challenged for MFA for sure. So again, you can play with those policies. You can create a new policy and see how that policy will affect the entirety of your users. Yeah, sure. What was the question again? Yeah, so third-party applications. Audit, yeah. Yeah, totally. So as long as that identity authenticates to Azure AD, if it goes to Box or Google Labs or whatever, you will be able to see all these reports here. So actually there's like, for example, what? Like you. Yeah, right. So the question was, can I, based on the identity of the user, maybe a group membership, block access to Box? And the answer is yes, precisely. So you would create a conditional access policy with group membership, all those users that you don't want to access Box. It's a very simple condition on the Box application, and you say deny. That's pretty straightforward, yeah. All right, so let me just complete the rest. We have 10 minutes, so we're okay. So we have talked about identity protection in the cloud, and finding intelligence data to prevent issues from happening in the future. But also we have what we call Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics, which is the ability, or rather the capability of the system to find threats on premises AD. So again, we have on-prem AD, we have moved those identities to the cloud. We are controlling all the cloud access, but the question is what happens if that account, which again is just one identity, is compromised on-prem. Some of the pass-the-hash attacks or all those things that we've heard in the last 10, 15 years in on-prem AD. So it's a very similar tool in the sense that it will analyze behaviors of specific accounts and things like if one account authenticated to a specific domain controller in a site, but at the same time or within a framework of time that is very short, that account also authenticated to a DC that is far away, then those things start coming into play as flags. So again, this completes the protection of the identity of the user on premises. We had the protection in the cloud, and then that completes the full end-to-end. And then, again, this is what we use: discovery, data control, threat protection. And this is kind of like the full view of EMS, right? So we have Intune to manage devices, to check compliance on those devices. We have Azure AD that manages the identities with hybrid integration with on-premises AD and protect access and applications, access from identity attacks. So we saw that. And then, of course, we have on-premises, we have on-prem AD, and we have advanced threat analytics that also checks for behavioral patterns and raise flags and makes decisions based on that. And then we have Microsoft Cloud App Security, which is in the cloud, how those decisions are made, how those patterns come into play as well. And then in the middle, we have Azure Information Protection, which is the missing piece of the puzzle, which was how to protect data at rest or on the move. On one side, we protected applications, the access to that application, but once we have that access, you may download that data. That data may end up in a different location, although we have those protections like what I talk about MAM and on others. But then that Azure Information Protection with RMS and that will give you the peace of mind that any piece of data, enterprise data coming to an managed device, for example, will be of no use because the keys are not there, so any rogue agent won't be able to have access to it. So we have a bunch of customer stories with a lot of success stories deploying Azure AD. This particular year, it is my personal goal to have organizations deploying devices in Azure AD with all the benefits that this that users will get when those devices come into Azure AD, all the protection that comes from that as well, conditional access and all that, what we have discussed. And again, so I'll be super interested in people who really want to bring those devices, and maybe just send me a tweet or something or an email, and we can help you with that. One particular example was Unilever. They deployed, they have hundreds of thousands of users. I don't know exactly don't remember the figure right now, but they have also a bunch of devices. They have brought those devices to Azure AD. They are enjoying the capabilities of protection with MFA, with domain joined devices as well, and with Azure AD. So don't forget today, ask the experts. at 6 p.m., so 1 hour and a half. In Hall D1, there will be refreshments based on this slide. I'll be there, so if you're interested, any questions, I know that we have talked very broadly, but if you are interested in a specific topic, we can go on and deep dive on that as well. There are some resources here in the deck that you can take a look. You will find them in the deck. So I have 4 minutes for questions. Again, we can go the Ask the Experts as well. Yes, please. So is the question about like a user having its own credential with, let's say, Box or with some other third-party application, and now how you want to reconcile that identity with your Azure AD identity? So the user will need to go through the Azure AD identity to do that. You could also think of B2C maybe or B2B in that model, but the idea is that the enterprise account that you offer to that employee is the one that will provide those benefits. All the auditing and all the protection will need to be based on that account, on that. So it will be 2 separate accounts. Yes, exactly, precisely.
So I don't want to be specific, but I think consider 3 different apps: Salesforce, SharePoint Online, Smart Office, and my on-prem web app. And so I work with Johnson Controls. So we have that identity rolled out.
Oh, okay.
But the identities of Salesforce users are on Salesforce.
Okay, I see.
Federate and establish SSO. So the Salesforce users can authenticate against SharePoint Online and access.
I see.
Is that a common scenario you've seen in other companies?
Well, that's a great question. So the question was very, very similar to the previous question. There are 3 applications, SharePoint Online, Salesforce.com, maybe an on-premises application. Users in Salesforce.com may have its own account, but they are really enterprise account. Like they are doing work for the organization in Salesforce.com. And then again, there's all the problems with federation that need to come with that. The question is that a common problem? So I don't work in the applications area. I can certainly ask and see how common is that. I see that there are 2 questions already about that. Please follow up with me, and we can. I would imagine that there has to be some kind of a story, some recommendation for that use case. Yeah, thank you. Yes, please. Right. That's the My Apps portal. It's myapps.microsoft.com. Yeah, right, precisely. You would, yes, with Azure subscription, you can just, if you have an Azure AD identity, like you have Office 365 or you have any Azure CRM or whatever, you will be able to go to that application and sign in with that Azure AD account, and you will see your applications. Yeah. Right. So those are the applications that you have been assigned by your organization that you have access to. So there's a different portal in the Azure portal where the admin may define what applications are available for the users in the organization. So in the particular example that we did, Garth needed to change his membership or add a membership to a specific group to have 20 more applications. So someone has said that those 20 applications apply to the sales team group. So when he added that group to his memberships, then he had access to those apps, and those apps appeared in the My Apps portal. And there could be on-premises applications that have been published, correct. Yep. Yes, please. Yeah, it's a great question. So the question is about the Authenticator app, and one of the latest bullets was about, I guess, Windows Hello for Business, which is basically where we are going to get rid of passwords. And today, Windows 10 has an implementation of that. The Authenticator app is basically the app that you need to install in iOS and Android, because we could not modify the architecture of the device. Of course, in Windows, it's part of the platform, but it registers your device, it provides single sign-on, it provides MFA, yes, and it will, and we are still thinking when are going to make that available. I mean, we're listening to where we're going still, but we will provide Windows Hello for Business support, which is that key or a credential that is TPM protected, that never goes out of the device, will be able to sign in directly to Azure AD, as it happens with Windows 10 today, if you have enabled that, which is great for those people who don't want passwords on the wire. You know, all that first number, 63% of vulnerabilities happen because of passwords stolen, so that would go away, yeah. Yeah, correct. So that's what we call remote Windows Hello for Business, or FIDO. There are some other names. Right. So in the case of Windows, there's an interface that you will be able to just use your phone to authenticate. Windows 10 for sure is this year, with probably the RS2, which is something around March each. Authenticator, we'll see. It will follow, but we'll see. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Yes, please.
Given the current state of Azure, what's the installation
Right. So the question is basically, in which cases do I need ADFS or not? So, so there are multiple reasons that you may want ADFS. One is that you may still have on-premises ADFS applications, of course. You may have, you may want that your passwords never go to the cloud because of security conscious decisions, compliance decisions. We have a couple of customers, or more than a couple, that are truly, they don't even want Azure AD to get the password. So with Azure AD Proxy, we have what we call PTA, the pass-through authentication, in which you don't need an ADFS, but you can use your corporate password, although it is not on-prem, or it's not in the cloud. It would go through the cloud to a domain controller on-prem. That way you would authenticate. But there are cases in which that's not even possible. So you would need ADFS on those cases. There's a new implementation of Windows Hello for Business that is coming on RS2 on March. Today, you need to deploy Windows Server 2016 DCs so the DC understands the key, that is protected on the TPM. But you can, if you don't want to upgrade to your DCs to 2016, you can deploy certs based on SCCM can deploy certificates based on that key. So you can just do PKInit to your domain controllers. There's an alternative that's coming in RS2 that is using ADFS. So there are some very specific scenarios that ADFS demands. Otherwise, you should not be able to, you should not need it really. Yeah, okay, so we are done. Find me at the Ask the Experts. We can continue the conversation, or tweet, or send me an email. Hi, Rosie. Thank you.